Hello, my name's Alison Cameron and I was the director of the St Nicholas Kirk East Kirk excavation project in 2005 and 2006. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about why we did the project and what we did, and then that'll lead on to other talks about what we actually found. This is a cut through of the East Kirk, and we were commissioned, Aberdeen City Council Archaeology Unit were commissioned by the Kirk of St Nicholas to carry out an excavation in the area below the East Kirk, which is in blue here, to allow them to create a space for a new development in which you would come in on the east end of the church through St Mary's Chapel and into a new area that we created. The church had quite a large excavation in the early 1970s, and this was in the area which is Collison's Isle, which is now the oil chapel in this excavated area here, prior to new central heating being put in. And so we looked at this excavation, which was carried out by John Hunter, and we realised that there were well preserved building remains. So you can see here walls, you can obviously see burials, and a lot of disarticulated human bone, which you can see here being collected from the excavation. So remains would be very well preserved. What we did in 2005 was an evaluation, which would be standard on a project like this, and it was quite unusual that pews were removed in bits of the church, like this area here, but leaving in the heating. And we excavated small trenches. So behind here, one of the small trenches that we excavated, this is the spoil heap for it, in amongst all the fittings of the church, which were still there, including the gallery, which you can see at the top of that picture. We had to dig through quite deep soil, so we created, joiners created for us shoring for the trenches, and here you can see one which has been shored up, and you can see a burial at the bottom here in the bottom of the trench. And another view here, you can see how we manage these, to allow the archaeologists to gain access. And we realised that there was a lot of burial soil and a lot of structural remains. And so in 2006, we opened out the whole area to allow us to do the full excavation. In 2006, we opened up area 20 by 20 metres. It revealed much more about the structural remains that we'd found, and it made much more sense than the small pits. This is the wall of St Mary's Chapel here. So underneath all of these boxes and finds here is St Mary's Chapel at the east end of the kirk. And so we were excavating on the other side of this wall. We've got structural remains coming in here, the sleeper walls for the 15th century church, and you can see the burial soils, the burials starting to be revealed here. What we did was we had a conveyor belt which took soil from the dig floor here out of the window at the east end and into a skip which was at the east end and was emptied every day, because we moved a huge amount of soil, 1,600 cubic meters of soil altogether. This is another view of the dig, and again you can see Ken Cooper here loading the barrow of soil and buckets onto the conveyor belt here. And again you can see St Mary's Chapel and the burials and structural remains. And another view here showing more what it was like on the dig. So there was areas where a number of archaeologists would be working. Each area was lit with these lights, so which had trailing cables. So there was quite a number of health and safety concerns, but that allowed then, you see, this burial to be lit in great detail, exactly in the place the archaeologist was working. The remains that we found were spectacular. We excavated in 11th or very early 12th century apse. These are the east end here. A 12th century, mid 12th century green here. Later 12th century replacement wall in yellow. What we think might be a sacristy, so built on after the 12th century. And then in pink, the 15th century church. The burial remains again were very well preserved. You can see here the apse with the radiating burials of 25 small children. You can see one here that's buried in a log coffin on the right, so burnt wood log. The 12th century church wall here at the top. This was a very popular area of the dig. People could look down and watch us, and so this was an area where the 12th century church here, the 12th to 15th century burial ground, and then at the bottom here the 15th century wall of St Mary's. So this was an area where had been outside in the 12th to 14th centuries, and from the 15th century inside in this new extended church. We found remains of buildings that had been covered up and weren't necessarily known about. This little staircase here on the left, a spiral staircase, which would have taken you from the lower level of St Mary's and up into the 15th century church, East Kirk. And then that was blocked off. So this vaulting, brick and stone vaulting here, possibly at the Reformation, that was blocked off to divide St Mary's from the rest of the church. And one of the things that we really enjoyed about the dig was all the people who visited us. So here we've got groups of school children. We had over 14,000 people visited during the year in 2006, including over 60 primary school classes. And this is one of them getting really close to the dig. They're actually on the scaffolding that we created to allow us to move around the dig area. But they also got to go up onto the gallery. So this is a group of adults up on the gallery. We had tours on Mondays and Friday afternoons, plus at opening times people could just come in and watch us, and so people would look down at us from the gallery. You know, you'd look up and there would be people watching all the time. And people could also look through this window. So again, we were looking, this is me here talking to one of the volunteers, but you could see people at this window a lot. And this was good for people who not so good mobility, could come into the ground floor of St Nicholas and watch us. And the apse is just below this window. So as we were uncovering that with all these burials, people were watching us as we uncovered them. I was actually able to excavate some of the burials myself. I delegated some of the directorial responsibilities. So this was me excavating some of the individuals that we found, 925 or so whole skeletons, or ones that had been cut by later burial activity. And there's some standout skeletons. There were some really interesting conditions which really got you to understand what people's lives were like in the past. This was a woman who'd been buried after the 15th century. You can see here she's got, there's a pin here, and we had lots of copper alloy pins and bits of textile from things that people were wearing, obviously, when they were buried. But this woman had a really severe medical condition, scoliosis of the spine, just following the spine round like that. And so incredibly debilitating. But she lived till quite an age, and so would have had to been cared for. Another condition that I like, smoker's notch. So after the introduction of tobacco around the early 17th century, people who needed to use both their hands for working, so making and repairing nets and doing all sorts of other jobs, would clamp a clay pipe in between their teeth and would create a notch like this. But this one individual had then created a notch. Maybe it had become too loose, and they had then clamped on the other side, and so they have actually got two smokers' notches. And we had quite a number of those individuals excavated at this one. And we had a lot of publicity, and so after the dig for a few years we were fielding lots of queries about the dig and what we'd found. We had the cover of Current Archaeology here, talking at conferences, and we're obviously still talking about the site, and will be doing for a long time. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch with me and with Arthur Winfield, who's the project manager, and you can ask us questions. But there'll be other talks on this YouTube channel about the things that we found on the dig over the next few months.